Fabian Society online meeting. My name's Andrew Harrop, and we're delighted to be hosting this evening's meeting, talking about the election of a new Labour leader, Keir Starmer, which we didn't know when we organised the meeting. So tonight's topic is new leader, new challenges. Where should Labour go next? If you've not been to one of these Fabian Zoom meetings, just to say a few bits and pieces about how the technology works, we'll be hearing from our speakers first of all for the first portion of the meeting, but then we'll have lots of time for question and answer. And how it works is that we'd like you to type in questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. And then we'd also like you to look at the questions that other participants have asked, and you can vote on which questions you like most. And when we look at the Q&A function, we'll pick out some of the most popular questions that others of you have already said you'd like to hear answered. So that's basically how it will work. There'll also be a few links from us in the chat function, so look out for that. One of the links will be a link to joining the Fabian Society. If you're not already a member, you're very welcome to join. We'd love to have some more Fabians with us. And the other link will be for those of you who are already Fabian members to our donation page if you'd like to make an extra gift to the society. So that's enough on the advertising. I want to just in a moment bring in our three speakers, two of whom are on the call already. So we'll be hearing from Sonia Sodha from The Observer and Guardian, and from Owen Jones from The Guardian. And we'll also be joined in a few minutes by Sobel MP, who is very kindly joining us because it's Passover, but doing a little bit of juggling before he comes onto the call. So it's been a really exciting and interesting week if you are in the Labour Party family. Even though Keir Starmer's election was heavily anticipated, there's a big difference between what people are thinking about as a hypothetical and it really happening. We've already seen some very important decisions and moments from the new leader, both Keir and now the appointment of his shadow cabinet. I'm sure we'll be picking over the significance of the appointments he's made, what it means for the future direction of the party, and also starting some, putting in train some reforms to the party. Particularly, he's chosen as an early priority to tackle head-on anti-Semitism as an issue. But of course, the other key issue is this is not the context that the new leader thought he was going to be coming into office 3 months ago because of the corona crisis. And I'm sure we will be discussing throughout the course of the meeting how the new leadership responds as a constructive opposition to a completely unprecedented crisis, both right now, but also what is likely to become a hugely damaging recession over the months and years ahead. So a huge amount to talk about. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, and that's Sonia Sodha.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Andy, and thank you to the Fabians for inviting me. I'm pleased to say this is my first online Zoom webinar, and it's certainly the biggest Zoom meeting I've done yet, 168 participants I can see. So thanks very much for tuning in, everyone. To those of you who don't know me, I'm chief leader writer at The Observer and an Observer Guardian columnist, and I also have a background working for the Labour Party. So I used to work for Ed Miliband back when he was leader in the early days of his leadership. So I'm going to try and keep my comments to just 5 minutes, so we've got loads of time for questions and discussion. I think for me, there are three pretty kind of gargantuan tasks facing the new Labour leader, and I'll say something about all three, but I'll probably do the first two quite quickly and then spend a bit more time on the third. So the first big challenge, I think, is what does it mean to provide a really mature, responsible, functioning opposition at a time of national crisis like this? And I'm sure lots of you will have questions about that, and there'll be a lot of discussion. And I think Jeremy Corbyn came in for quite a lot of criticism for the style of opposition that he ran. I think much of it was fair, some of it less so. But this is a completely different landscape from Brexit for Keir Starmer. And I think it's really difficult to get the tone right. It's difficult to hold the government to account for failures in policy, of which we already know there have been some in the first few weeks of this crisis, without it looking like you're sort of politically point scoring. And one of the reasons I'm not going to say too much about this is because I think actually, even from before Starmer was elected, there were some shadow cabinet members who were doing a really good job, John Ashworth in particular, and I think Starmer's pretty much got it pitch perfect actually since the weekend, since his first appearance on Mar. So I think it's much trickier to actually do than to sort of talk about in theory, but I think that's going to be really, really important. I think the second huge challenge, and again, it's something we've already seen Starmer make some headway on, is really tackling some of the toxic cultures that have developed in the party over the last few years. First and foremost, of course, there's anti-Semitism. The EHRC investigation into anti-Semitism, institutional anti-Semitism in the party is still ongoing. And I think that Keir Starmer, making one of his first acts, writing to the Jewish Board of Deputies, reaching out, was a good move. But that's only a very first step, and there's a huge lack of trust with the Jewish community, a lot of anger, and I think Starmer's really going to have to work very, very hard to try and build those bridges again. But again, I think the early steps that he's taken has been great. And on the culture point, I would say I don't think it's just anti-Semitism. There've also been a lot of concern about how the party deals with complaints about sexual harassment. And one of the things that Starmer has said that he will do is introduce an independent complaints process for anti-Semitism, racism, and complaints about sexual harassment. And I think that is entirely the right direction for the party to go in at the moment, because I think there's a lack of trust there across all bases. So that's all I'm going to say about the culture point. And then the third sort of massive challenge, and I have to say, even though I think those other two challenges are big, this is even bigger, as it were. But it's really about how Starmer kind of paints a vision for what the world would look like, what Britain would look like under a Labour government, coming out of this massive national crisis, which is undoubtedly the biggest crisis that we've faced since the Second World War. And it's always been very hard for Labour leaders to do this, and I think that's partly because it isn't quite a level playing field, as a lot of us know. Gordon Brown couldn't do it, Ed Miliband couldn't do it, Jeremy Corbyn couldn't do it. There haven't been very many leaders who successfully told a story about Labour, the difference that Labour's going to make to the country, that a majority of the electorate, a broad coalition of the electorate, which is so important under our electoral system, has bought into. And I think, obviously this pandemic is a massive disaster for the country, but I do think that there will be little kind of silver threads of things emerging through this crisis. But it doesn't, it's not inevitable that those are going to change the way we live as a society. But I think it will be up to Labour to see if they can really make something of them. And I'm talking about, things like civil society coming together, the way that some of us work change, the way that some of us travel will be changing, probably to the benefit of the environment. So I think it's wrong to frame this as, oh, look at everything the government is doing, throwing huge amounts of money at this problem. This shows that sort of socialism has won. I think that's completely the wrong framing for this. The government is doing this because literally they have to, and I don't think it will lead to an inevitable change in our politics. But I think the massive challenge for Starmer will be coming out of this. How do we take hold of some of the policies that were perhaps introduced through this crisis and build on them? And I don't think that that's inevitable. I do think it's a challenge. And I think there are just a few big questions that have really been so important for Labour since 2010, have only got more so in the last decade, and will become even more important coming out of the coronavirus pandemic. So I'll just say something briefly about three of them. So first is really, educational attainment and the gap in educational attainment between children from less advantaged backgrounds and their more affluent peers. And I think, I remember writing an editorial for The Observer back in 2017, looking at both the Conservative and the Labour manifestos and saying neither of them really have got enough concrete policies about how to close that gap. And that's going to become even more important, I think, in a world where schools have been closed for weeks, possibly months, and it really is going to be kids from less advantaged backgrounds who've got fewer books at home, whose parents haven't been to university, who are really going to suffer the consequences of that more. And I think we're going to see the attainment gap increase as a result. So I think that's a really big challenge for Labour. Another big challenge is what we do about our ageing society, and that is something that we've just not grappled with as a society over the last kind of 10, 20 years. If you look at our social care system, massive problems of underfunding, but I don't think it's just that. I think there are cultural issues as well about what's acceptable when it comes to caring for older people, and I think there's a huge spotlight on that at the moment. And I think even in the way that we talk about this pandemic, actually, there is a bit of a sense that, there's some reporting of what's going on in care homes, and it's really quite scary, I think. But if anything, we're not talking about it in quite the same way as what's going on in hospitals. And I think that reflects a natural ageism in our society and a sort of a kind of tendency to write older people off. So I think there are big questions around that. And then thirdly, I think there are huge questions around what we do about our massive sector of low paid work, which is often termed low skill work. And I think one thing this pandemic is showing us is that actually the jobs that people are risking their lives going out to do, some of them are incredibly low paid, while the rest of us get to sit at home and work from home. I think it's always been a challenge for the left to think about, well, how do we change the culture, the status, the dignity around some of that work? How are unions involved in that? And I hope that there will be a bit of an opportunity coming out of this, just because we are all going out and clapping, not just for doctors, but for healthcare assistants and for care workers working in care homes and in home care every Thursday evening. There's a bit of an opportunity there, I think, to change some of the culture around that. So there's loads more I could say around the policy and the policy challenges for Labour's new leader. But I think it's some of those big issues that we've known about for a really long time, but have come into even sharper focus as a result, I think, of this kind of national crisis that we're all in.
Sonia, thank you so much. There's a lot to chew over in those remarks, and we'll get into a lot of the detail in the question and answer. But three big areas there for Labour to think about. And Owen, I'd love to bring you in to see. I suspect there'll be some agreement, but you'll probably have areas of emphasis for yourself. So Owen, take it away.
Well, firstly, huge honour to be invited by the Fabians. Been a bit of a regular over the years, always been fantastic events, very thought-provoking, and always bringing together different wings of the left, the Labour movement. And I think that's particularly important in these times of crisis and upheaval for progressive politics and also for society. And I hope as well everyone's staying safe. This is a very stressful time, more stressful for some than others, which I'll touch upon because I think it's very much part of this discussion. I think one of the things I would start by saying is I had a very interesting discussion with Margaret Hodge a few weeks ago, and the point I made, and there was agreement on this, was that our wings of the left could spend huge amounts of time in acrimony, but actually we should have the humility to accept that actually neither of those wings of politics are flourishing at the moment. There's no majority social democratic government on earth, and it is important to have that international perspective because I think a lot of our politics focuses, Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism has always been a problem. In the late 1990s, the third way model of social democracy was hegemonic everywhere. It was Jospin in France, it was Gerhard Schroeder in Germany, and you had the Clintons, the White House, much of the Nordic countries, places like the Netherlands. And today, the only three striking examples of a social democratic government in office, which you could say are successes, are really, I would say, Spain, Portugal, and Denmark. And in actually what's happened in those countries is the more radical left and the so-called centre-left have formed alliances and pacts. So the Spanish socialists and the Portuguese socialists both moved to the left, but also struck pacts with the radical left, a coalition with Podemos in Spain, and with a pact with the two radical left parties in Portugal. And in Denmark, the socialists moved to the left, except they ate for in racism, which wasn't particularly something to extol as a virtue, to say the least. It's disgusting, but actually they formed an alliance with more radical parties and had to drop a lot of that astonishing racism. Beyond that, you could talk about New Zealand, but there again, Labour's sister party came up all second and formed an alliance with centrist populists. So I think we do need to be aware that this is a general international crisis of European social democracy, where, you know, places like Germany, which far more tacked to the centre in terms of its leadership, they got 20% in the last elections, and they've bombed way beyond that. Many social democratic parties on the verge of total annihilation across Europe. So this isn't a particular crisis here. One of the big crises that Keir Starmer's leadership has to address is the generational divide that's opened up, which has no precedent. In 1983, Margaret Thatcher won the youth vote. She had a 9-point lead amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. Now, Labour has unprecedented support amongst people under 40, even more so than in the 1997 landslide, and unprecedented low levels amongst older people. And that's very difficult for someone of my persuasion. I abhor generational politics, but it's a fact. And I think what's happened is, rightly, amongst older people, their living standards have been protected through the triple lock, through rising levels of home ownership, quantitative easing. They're also far the most socially conservative demographic, whilst the working age population suffered the worst squeeze in wages since the Napoleonic era. Home ownership's in collapse, particularly amongst younger people, driven into a rip-off private rented sector. Their services slashed, saddled with student debt. They were promised freedom, but in practice that's being precarious, being insecure. That's not freedom at all. And they're also far more socially progressive and feel those socially progressive values under assault. And it's very difficult to construct an alliance between those generations. Where there is no precedent for that level of gap. In the past, if your grandparents voted for Labour, the parents probably did and the kids probably did as well, and that's completely changed now. If your grandparents vote Tory, you're more likely to vote, if you're the grandkids, for the Labour Party. So how that is bridged is very, very difficult. In terms of, I think there is some, in terms of optimism, that there is unity is broken out, in the sense there's a policy consensus in the Labour Party. You need to remember that Labour's manifesto in 2015 was based on reducing tuition fees a little bit, a slight increase in minimum wage, no real vision. My understanding of Corbynism is, before 2015, Social Democrats stopped being Social Democrats. They abandoned social democracy, and the only consistent champions left of social democracy were the radical left fringes of the Labour Party, and that's why that's why in the most against all the odds, Corbyn became leader. I think now what seems to have happened is that those social democrats, because of this, of the last few years, have rediscovered their social democracy. They've either been shocked back into it or they have the courage of it. And I think in terms of Starmer's mandate, which is based on adopting the basic underpinnings of Corbyn's agenda, he called the 2017 Labour Manifesto the foundational document of the Labour Party. The fact is, obviously, he owes his mandate to people who voted for Corbyn in 2 leadership elections and trusting him with not departing, as he promised, not to oversteer away from that agenda. The appointment of Annalise Dodds, I think, really speaks to preserving that agenda. So I think, there is optimism. There is a basis, I think, particularly now, hopefully, the Brexit culture war will subside, even though I think the generational divide and Brexit, culture war, you can't separate the two. Just finally, in terms of the coronavirus, no, of course, no one should say this is a vindication of their politics or anything like that. What coronavirus does do, though, is expose a broken social order, and it speaks truths that we undervalue and underpay the pillars of our society, that our health service and social care are drastically underfunded and underprepared and under-resourced. That the welfare state is woefully inadequate, and millions now, including of middle-class people, are now being forced to confront that basic fact. That millions of people in one of the wealthiest countries on earth are always one pay packet away from extreme hardship. You know, and there's other, I think, appalling things which will be revealed out of this, by the way. Things like domestic or exposed domestic violence, things like LGBTQ kids who are now forced to live with their intolerant parents. There's a whole range of injustices. And I think that the idea that Labour would, at a time when the Tories are being forced to adopt radical measures, obviously because of a crisis, to steer away from radical economic and social measures to overcome the self-evident social crisis would be perverse. I think the comparisons with World War II are slightly overblown and bizarre in lots of ways. But it was, you know, the World War II exposed injustices that existed in British society, and that led to the appetite, or fueled the appetite for a much more coherent and expanded welfare state. And as William Beveridge said in World War II, a revolutionary moment of the world's history is a time for revolutions, not for patching. So I think my own view is there is a clear policy consensus within the Labour Party. The key challenges are that generational gap, and about asking searching questions about why social democracy is in crisis, not just here, but everywhere, that there are clear problems across the world, and we should learn from other places as well, like Spain, like Portugal, like Denmark, for example, at the moment, in terms of, even though they have a different electoral system, but the fact that different traditions of the left have managed to form alliances nonetheless. And I think that's particularly important. Obviously, the cancer of anti-Semitism, as Sonia says, has to be urgently addressed. But my own view is the civil wars of the Labour Party have to end. We have to, you know, I think people are exhausted by them. I think there is the differences on policy that exist now are actually much smaller than they've been in the Labour Party for a very, very long time. I think the shadow cabinet speaks to that sense of unity. And I think now, from my own perspective, what people on the left should be doing is obviously being, I think, champions of that radical agenda and defending the radical agenda in which Keir Starmer's democratic mandate is based on, not being scared to criticise, particularly when he departs from that, if he departs from that, but also going back to extra parliamentary and social movements, which I think in the era of crisis, which will exist after the pandemic, I think there'll be a huge appetite for that. We've already seen that with the climate movement, but we need to again be embedded in those communities, organising the precarious, the insecure, the gig economy. These are movements that need voices, and the Labour Party and the Labour movement need to be allied with those movements and given representation. So I think that extra parliamentary struggles are very important going ahead. But above all else, I think this is a time for unity. Unity doesn't mean deference. People should criticise and disagree. But I think, given the monumental scale of the injustices and the crises that scar and define British society at the moment, I think there's more fertile ground for people to see themselves as friends, indeed comrades, than there has been for a very long time.
Owen, thanks a lot. And I'm delighted to say that as you were talking, Alex Sobel did join us, which is very good news for the rest of the meeting. Just before I bring Alex in, I want to just tell you there's a social media hashtag for the meeting I forgot to mention at the start, which is New Leader Fabians. So comments on Twitter, very much appreciated. And also to remind you about the Q&A.
That kind of sounds like you're getting replaced, Andy.
We'll see about that. And we've got the Q&A. We've got the Q&A function as well. Now, lots of you have started asking questions. So we've got 20 already in the queue. But I'd love you to start voting on other people's questions, because that will mean I can pick out the most popular when we've heard from Alex. But after all of that, let me turn to Alex. Alex, you must be really pleased, given that you're known as an MP from the soft left, and that's the word that has been most used to describe the new shadow cabinet. So over to you.
Yeah, when I joined the Labour Party, nobody wanted to be on the soft left. Now everybody wants to be on the soft left. Whether they are on the soft left or not might be another matter. I heard a bit of what Sonia said, and I heard all of what Owen said. And I think we're going to have the unfortunate thing where we all tend to agree, which doesn't create lively debate, but might create the unity that we all want in the Labour Party here anyway. So I think that my sort of starting point's a bit different. I think that we created actually a new radical settled policy platform over the last 5 years, and I don't think that is the main area of contention in the Labour Party. I think the main areas of contention lie outside that. And I think if you look at Keir Starmer's 10 pledges, they are by and large taken from the 2017 Leicester 2019 manifesto, and it is effectively embedding them into the Labour Party. So my view is that those 10 pledges will effectively become the bedrock of policy making in the Keir Starmer era, in opposition anyway, and that things will then move from there. And actually, if you look at it, for instance, bringing rail, mail, energy and water into public ownership, key asks in the manifesto, raising tax on the top 5%, bringing corporation tax back to 2010 levels, all things in our manifesto, abolishing universal credit, ending sanctions, all things in the manifesto. The leadership election created more heat than light, and people were saying things that weren't actually materially true. Materially, the three policy platforms of the three candidates wasn't a long way apart. That's not where the areas of contention lied. I'm afraid to say our biggest problem in the Labour Party is a cultural one. I don't mean the societal culture, I mean our internal party culture. And that is the biggest thing that's going to have to be resolved. And we've seen, that Keir, straight away, and obviously I'm Jewish. Today is Passover. Usually I'm wearing my yarmulke. So I was a bit late because we had our Passover dinner, our Seder dinner this evening, and I came onto the call. But, the first thing he did was reach out to the Jewish community. The Jewish community responded in kind, and there's clearly now a dialogue which completely failed to exist from 2015 with the Labour Party and the Jewish community. And I immediately feel better being in the Labour Party now. It was difficult, it was stressful being a member of the Labour Party as a Jew for 5 years. Whatever I thought about politics, actually, my biggest thing, and this is maybe a controversial thing to say, is that I felt that my socialism was being questioned because of my Judaism, right? And I don't want to be in a party that does that. I don't think any other Jewish person in the Labour Party wants to do that who feels their Judaism. Anyway, so I don't want to get completely taken up about anti-Semitism, but I think what is also important, and I'm not sure that I think Owen started to talk about it, and so I won't repeat what he said, but that we lost voters who felt Labour didn't speak for them. It didn't, not that it didn't listen to them, because in a lot of those communities, their MPs did listen to them. And I know that I've got communities like that in my constituency, which is very mixed, listen to them, but we may have listened, but they didn't feel we spoke for them. And so they didn't vote for us. And they didn't necessarily feel the Tories spoke for them, but they felt that the Tories were articulating a particular view at a particular time, and they were lending their votes to the Tories. And we've got to find now a way of speaking to them. And so my very strong view is that, and it's a very dry thing, but what we need is a new industrial settlement. So all those communities feel that Labour is going to deliver for them. We're going to deliver housing, we're going to deliver jobs, we're going to deliver infrastructure, we're going to deliver good quality of life to them, their children and their grandchildren. And the current pandemic actually has completely exposed the system. not just that the NHS is thin, not just that our social care system's broken because it's basically run by the private sector, not just that that our social welfare system is inadequate, but actually capitalism is very precarious. The companies with a slight, we're hardly into this. Let's be honest, we're in 2 weeks into this. If we were a year, if this was really bad and we were like this for a year, how many British companies would survive? Barely any, right? The ones that we need in the pandemic, the supermarkets will be fine, and so the whole facade of capitalism is falling apart in front of people's eyes. And so we need to build an alternative. There can be no returning to business as usual. And Labour's job, really, in the very immediacy, is to oppose the government where they're getting things wrong, say on PPE, but also start building a vision of what a resilient social democratic society looks like. And actually, ironically, the only country in Europe that's really weathered this well has been Germany. And they've been run by the Christian right for 20 years. No, not that long, actually, 15 years, right? So we've clearly got some lessons to learn, and we need to rebuild this. And I think people start listening to us and think we're speaking for them if we can show that we're going to build a country that's different to the one that we're leaving. This is let's make no mistake, it's a watershed moment. It's a watershed moment. There is no going back to exactly how it was before. It's how we respond to it.
Great. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure you finished that. That's
sorry. Yeah.
You are sticking to the instruction to speak for 5 minutes. I'm always slightly shell-shocked when the speakers do that. So that means we've got lots of time for the question and answer. We did ask a few people when they registered if they'd like to ask questions in advance. I'm just going to ask a couple of those before we get on to the ones you've just been submitting. The first person I want to ask if he's ready is Sam Dalton, who pre-submitted a question. If you can't remember what it was, Sam, I'll read it out for you. But are you? Hi, Sam. Can you speak?
Yeah.
Hey, Sam. Do you remember your question, or shall I read it out for you?
I can remember. Yeah. It's quite related to some of the things that Owen already talked about, actually. But in terms of the generational divide in Labour voters, it's obviously become clear over at least the last couple of elections that Labour has been much more successful with younger people than older people. And I was just wondering, in the context of an ageing society in which we still do see older people voting to a much larger degree than younger people, how do we start to turn that around and ensure that the Labour Party is a party for both young people and older people? What sort of policies do you think will start to attract the older generation again back to the party?
I just want to take a question from Jake Alcock as well, which is quite similar and is currently the most popular question that you're voting on. Jake, can you come in? Hello, Jake, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, I was just wondering, how can you bring the trust back with the communities that Labour, some people have left behind? So under the Blair government, so the centrists with their financial crash, a lot of communities felt, I guess, that the trust was broken here with centre governments. And then with radical left policies under Corbyn, people have that fear of what that could be brought. And then they see it and they fear that as well. So my question is just how does Labour bring the trust back from other people?
Great. Let's start with Alex, as the elected politician. How does Labour reunite young and old, and also all the different sort of communities who at different times have felt alienated from the party?
Oh, you're muted, Alex.
I'm unmuting myself. Right. So I've been talking about this since pretty much since I've been elected, because this is not something that's just suddenly happened. If you look, we lost in 2017. We lost Walsall North. We lost Mansfield. it just the whole facade just fell, this time. But it was this shift was happening, and you saw the majorities of places where they'd had 25,000 majorities having 10,000 majorities. So 2017 was just sticking plaster, really. So the thing, there's two different things. So one, there's how you deal with it in opposition, and then there's how you deal with it once you have power. But obviously, you have to get the power first. So I wrote a piece in the Guardian. I'm going to be sort of, I'm going to sort of self-publicise myself now. So I wrote a piece in the Guardian really just after we lost the election about how, and we've got an opportunity now, the new leadership, to do this, how in all the seats that we lost, we need to look at what resource we had, like the former MPs' offices, our infrastructure, the unions, and how we could then provide support for the communities there as a movement. And that includes working with groups like, say, Acorn or others that really are part of our movement, that are working in those sort of communities where there's poor housing and precarious work and all those other things. And in opposition, we need to be stood shoulder to shoulder and providing services and support, knocking on doors and asking our standard 4 question, which I hate, by the way, which is, who do you vote for in the last election? Who are you going to vote for in the next general election? Who are you going to vote for the local elections? And do you prefer Labour or Tory? Isn't going to get us anywhere in any of those places. You ask those after you've built a relationship with trust, and you'll get an honest answer. You don't spend 5 years asking those questions. So we need to basically be building projects, doing community organising at the next level. So it's not, we're doing a bit of community organising, be able to, then get some voter ID. That's sort of been a bit of the culture. There's been some really good stuff around training and other things. We really need to build that community organising up to a point where it is us supporting the community and taking things on. Because otherwise, they're going to trust their Tory MP, and their Tory MP is going to speak on behalf of them and take their issues forward. Then when we're in government, and I think the next manifesto, we've got technology now, and nearly everybody's got a phone. So we should be able to have a map of the country, and somebody should be able to go to their locality rather than looking at the manifesto and go, yeah, this is what Labour's going to do for me here. But it's going to say how much, I don't know, how much they're going to invest in the local hospital, what they're going to do in terms of creating local jobs, what they're going to do in terms of skilling people up in the particular sector. And I think we can do that. Nobody's done it before. It's not that hard to do, but we need to be able to spend 4 years building that. Otherwise, we're not going to have enough to show people to get to where we need to be.
Thanks, Alex. Sonia and Owen, if you could address that quite quickly, because we've got lots of other great questions. Sonia first.
Sure. So maybe I'll just say something briefly on the generational point, because I think it's really, really important. And I think the way to, Labour clearly has to build a winning coalition that goes across the ages, because it's the only way to win under our electoral system. And also it's just the right thing to do. And I think the trap that you have to avoid falling into is a sort of very much them versus us, young versus old narrative. It's ridiculous, when that plays out in the political narrative, because it's just not the way that normal people think. Because obviously, if you're a grandparent or a parent, you're really worried about your own kid not being able to get onto the housing ladder, or what's going to happen to your own kid who might not go to university, or what's going to happen if they leave university saddled with debt and not able to get the kind of graduate job that may have been available 20 or 30 years ago. So I think it really has to be building a unifying narrative that explains why. And the hard truth is that some of this is zero sum. So for example, if you look at the housing market, the only way to address what's going on in the housing market and improve affordability, both of rents and house prices to buy for younger people, is to basically having a housing market where house prices aren't just stagnant, they may be falling a bit. And no politician wants to be in charge at the moment of a house market that does that. So you have to be able to talk to people who already own their own houses and explain why, you can't rely on a housing market that is just going to keep on going up and up and enables consumer spending to sort of ever increase based on kind of rising and inflated house prices. So it's really tricky, but you have to build a narrative narrative that brings the generations together. And I think that's very related to Jake's question around trust, actually. And it's easy to kind of talk about trust as a theoretical concept, but the only way that you're going to bring back Labour voters, whether they're sort of swing voters who might vote Tory sometimes, or whether they're voters who literally voted Labour all their lives and deserted Labour for the first time in the last general election, it's not the only way you earn that trust, really, is by convincing people that you've got something to offer them and being able to talk to people about what your agenda means for them. And I sort of think that that was one of the big areas in which Labour went wrong in 2019. I'm not sure that for the many versus the few narrative actually worked. I think it's quite oppositional. I don't think people naturally think about the world in terms of sort of them versus us. I don't think it kind of goes with the sort of natural grain of the way a lot of voters think about fairness. So it's really, you've got socialist policies, like, fine, I agree with a lot of socialist policies, but it's not enough just to be like, oh, we're right, we've got these policies and they're right, so you better vote for us next time. That isn't enough. You have to explain to people why they're the right policies. And I'm sorry, just saying that you're right and they're wrong doesn't cut it. You have to be able to explain to people in the way that they think about the world and the way that they think about fairness, which is not any less valid than perhaps your own. You have to be able to translate for them why their policies are right in terms of the way their values and the way they think about the world. And I think that's the only way that Labour can build trust back. And I don't think that Labour did that in December 2019.
And Owen?
Yeah, I mean, I should be clear. I mean, as I said before, I abhor generational politics and the idea of generation versus generation. I was trying to understand why there was such an unprecedented gap in voting. I would say it's very important that Labour don't just triangulate with younger people, because whilst younger people are more inclined to support the Labour Party than they've ever had, they're also less attached in terms of party loyalty than ever before as well. So they will defect very quickly if they feel Labour is no longer speaking according to their priorities. And again, I would say this maybe, but I think a lot of people understood the rise of the left as mass hysteria or irrational or any, et cetera, but there was a reason why younger Americans who were more likely to support Reagan than their parents in the 1980s are now flocking to Bernie, or Bernie Sanders has now stood down, but flocked to Bernie Sanders, why they flocked to Podemos in Spain, why they flocked to radical left parties in Portugal, why they flocked to the Labour Party under Corbyn. It's a structural thing and it won't go away. And that's to do with economic insecurity above all else, fused with a sense that their progressive values under attack. But with older people, I mean, it's a huge, huge challenge. And I think, whilst not abandoning, I mean, you get some on the so-called blue Labour wing who want Labour to basically, when they say shift to more socially conservative views, I ask, which minority do you want to throw under which bus? And that, it would be obviously wrong, but also insincere. And if Labour gets into a Dutch auction over how socially conservative it can be with the right, it will always lose anyway and shift those issues up the agenda, as unfortunately happened with immigration before 2015. So I think with older people, there has to be a relentless focus on issues like social care, like loneliness and solitude. And I've been writing about over the last few weeks about issues, how loneliness is a killer of older people. It's actually a public health crisis which kills. About things like late stage care for those with terminal illnesses who are old. I think Labour needs to. I think what happened after the last election in 2017, when Labour got 40% of the vote and the Tories got 42%, was Labour afterwards decided there were three groups they needed to aim to build on: Scottish voters, voters in the Midlands, and older voters. And they didn't have any strategy to do that. They just stated it privately and did nothing about it. They should have had an all-out campaign focused on the priorities of older people. And I think it's possible to do that on issues like social care and loneliness and solitude, and have a coherent vision, which Labour did have in 2017, but certainly didn't in 2019, in a way that brings the generations together. But I don't think Labour spoke about the priorities of older people for the last 2.5 years. And I think it's possible to do that without pitting generations against each other.
Thanks, Owen. I'm going to bring in three people at once, like we do in our face-to-face meetings, because I know there's so many of you who want to come in. Yasmin Lever, first of all. Sorry, Yasmin Lever. I'm bringing in the wrong Yasmin. Are you? Sorry, everyone. Yasmin,
Yeah.
are you there?
I'm here. Yes.
Yeah,
Shall I ask my question?
Sorry, yes, you've got a question touching on something Owen just said.
Totally. So my question is this: why does the Labour Party seem so keen to maintain a rule that expels people who vote tactically or otherwise punishes them? We're in a two-party system where it is very hard for people to vote for their true preferences anyway, as the choices are so limited. And the first past the post makes the consequences of tactical voting really important in many areas. So why is the Labour Party so opposed to it still and so unwilling to debate the issue seriously, even in circumstances like over the past few years where their chances of winning an outright majority were very, very small, and where they would have needed a coalition of some sort in even the most favourable but realistic circumstances? And I just want to a caveat to that. I know that in the last election it was incredibly hard with the Lib Dems, with the leader and with a whole load of things. So I just want to say that as a caveat. But one of the reasons I brought up this question is I campaigned all over the place, including Kensington and Chelsea, and Kensington and whatever. And I would bump into Lib Dem activists, and we would all bemoan the fact that we knew we were all bringing in a Tory government.
Thanks, Yasmin. We haven't yet talked very much about the huge mountain to climb that Keir Starmer has to overcome. 123 seats to gain a majority of one. If that's not possible, does that mean working with other parties? Others have also asked about Scotland, which of course, you know, is a big part of the mix, because either we need to defeat the SNP or we'd have to work with the SNP in government, which poses huge challenges. I've got another question on a different issue, which is from Chaz Lilystone, who submitted this in advance. I don't know if Chaz is on the call. Let me see if I can. Yes, Chaz, if you want to come in with your question, just very briefly, please. Go ahead, Chaz. Right, it's not working, so I will read out the question instead. Chaz says, UBI, Universal Basic Income, seems to be gaining support in the current coronavirus crisis. Should we be adopting it as part of the values and principles of the Labour Party? So hold that one. I'd like your thoughts on UBI. At our last meeting about 10 days ago, Rachel Reeves, who of course is now in the shadow cabinet, came out in support of UBI for the first time. And I also want to bring in our top voted question at the moment, which is from Alex Byron. So Alex, can you ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just feel like Labour's suffered both sides of the sword in the last 10 years. In 2015, we were accused of abandoning our values, and then in 2019, we were accused of, well, policy overload, perhaps on the left. Broadband being a good example. I winced at that, not perhaps because it is perhaps a good idea, but because it just plays so deeply into the narrative that we still can't be trusted with the economy. So how do we reconcile Keir's 10 pledges with a manifesto for 2024? Do we need less is more like the Tories, or do we need to maybe hark back to at least one success from '97, which was connecting them far more realistically to stories and journeys from voters?
Great. Sonia, do you want to kick off with those questions?
Sure. So, yeah, on kind of how Labour works with other parties, I think there is too much tribalism, and I actually think that the rule that expels people who sort of vote tactically for other parties is really antiquated. I just don't think it works with our electoral system. I also think Labour's done itself no favours. I think in the last few years it's looked like it's used expulsions as a sort of way of cleansing Labour of its like political enemies, for example, like what happened with Alistair Campbell, while at the same time, you know, it seemed that if you sort of said anti-Semitic things but were Jeremy Corbyn's mate, you weren't going to be expelled. So I think Labour's done itself no favours with it, and I would definitely relax that rule. And I think that the party actually, like electoral reform, you're never going to win an election on an agenda of electoral reform, but I think the more fragmented the electorate becomes, the the more that politics operates differently in a country like England and in a country like Scotland, the harder it is for a party like Labour to win under a first past the post electoral system. And I think it's you know, Andy talked about the sort of mountain facing Keir Starmer. I think it is really challenging. And so I think Labour isn't going to win on a platform of electoral reform, but I think that with a fragmented electorate, it probably is the right system for us. It's the right thing to do. And I also suspect it's probably in Labour's kind of interest. So I think it should be talking to other parties about that. UBI, very quickly, I'm not a supporter of UBI. I think there are other radical economic policies like shorter working time, starting with people in low paid work, that I'm far more supportive of. I think a UBI, often the argument for it is framed in terms of the end of work or a reduction in the amount of work, and the fact that some jobs may not exist in ways that sort of work is really important. And the question should be, how do we imbue work with more dignity and autonomy for more people, rather than what should replace it? So I'm not personally a fan of UBI. I've written quite a lot about that if anyone's interested, but there's loads more to say about it. And then in terms of kind of policy, I mean, I completely agree that I think the 2019 manifesto did have a bit of a kitchen sink sort of feel about it. And I think Labour sort of misunderstood. There's a big difference between having a worked out programme for government for the next 20 years and what you sort of put to the country for the next 5 years in a manifesto. And that's a really important distinction, because I looked at the manifesto and I just thought there's absolutely no way that's going to be achieved in 5 years, and if I thought that, loads of other people thought that too. So I think that there is something about the 1997 approach which is blending something with economic credibility, and I don't think we know what that's going to look like in 2024 yet. It will look completely different probably to what it looked like in 1997, but with a few high profile pledges that say what you're about as a party. I think if you try and sketch out a 20-year agenda for government in a manifesto for an election, people just don't know what to make of it, and I think it has real issues of credibility.
Owen.
Yeah, the policy, this is how I understood. I've been trying to get to the bottom of kind of what happened there, and basically what in 2017, before the general election, people might remember Labour started trading these policies like free school meals paid for by universal free school meals by scrapping VAT exemption of private schools. And they suddenly noticed for the first time they got a positive news cycle. And then in the general election of 2017, the manifesto was leaked twice. At first they were like, but then they were like, we got 2 bites of the cherry. This has actually really helped us. So they then had this kind of sense of, the only way we ever get positive media coverage, and the reason Jeremy Corbyn's personal ratings went up so much in the 2017 election was to do with that, he was seen as a man of principle and so on, was because of those policy announcements. And they thought in 2019, well, we don't want to talk about Brexit at all, so we'll just bombard people with policies all the time and that'll do the same thing. And obviously that didn't work at all. And I think part of the reason was, by the way, YouGov did very interesting polling a year ago. It showed over 3/4 of the reasons Jeremy Corbyn's approval ratings had collapsed were directly to do with Brexit or indirectly. And a lot of that was the advantage he had in 2017 was, if you agree with him or not, he says what he means and he means what he says. Brexit just obliterated that by 2019. He wasn't seen as trustworthy. He was seen as weak, unprincipled. He'll say anything. And that meant those policies, people didn't trust them, and they didn't land. Quite the reverse, if anything. It seemed insulting to people's intelligence. They didn't have a narrative either. It was for the many, not the few in 2017. In 2019, they went through 4 strap lines in that election, abruptly midway through changing to On Your Side. And it was just ridiculous and bizarre. So I do think what you need is a clear, optimistic vision. John Cruddas often says this, and I think it's true. 1945, a new Britain, 1960s under 64, Harold Wilson, the white heat of technology, 1997, New Labour, New Britain, very optimistic. We're going to build a brand new future. We own the future. I think Labour just needs to have that optimistic, hopeful vision. It's very easy on the left to sometimes, we all do it, sometimes on the left to go, look how miserable everything is, Tory misery, awful, 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 without having a compelling, optimistic, hopeful vision that inspires people. So I think you do stick. I think you should have 5 key pledges. It doesn't mean you don't have other things, but you stick to those 5 key areas you really want to focus on. You have message discipline, so you repeat them until you're bored of saying them yourself, and that's when you know they're hitting home. And you have an overall overarching message that they slot into. So for the many, not the few, every policy that was announced slotted into that vision. It reinforced that vision. And I think that's what was completely missing in 2019. It just looked like scattergun panic, which it was. UBI, I'm very sympathetic to UBI. Johnny Reynolds, more, I think, relevant to this, it's great about Rachel Reeves, is now the Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. And he's sympathetic to UBI as well. Stuart Lansley, who's a very interesting academic, has actually done a lot of research into how it can be made to work, because other models of UBI actually have perverse outcomes, like making poor people poorer, which is the opposite of what it's supposed to do. And I think coronavirus obviously underlines the one pay packet away from extreme hardship issue, which bedevils British society and the economy. But I also think the danger is, and I know this is said before in previous eras, but I think is more likely now, which is that whereas in the past new technology destroyed jobs, it also created far more jobs in its place. And the danger is that won't happen anymore, which I think is why UBI will come even more of age. Because of this crisis, Spain have already unveiled a form of UBI. So I think we'll be hearing far more about it. And it's something we should debate. Just finally, the auto-exclusion rule was introduced under New Labour. I mean, I know people say, who cares who introduced it? But the whole point is with auto-exclusion compared to other things. So, for example, the difference with more serious. So, for example, if I'm found to park on a double yellow line, I won't go to court. I will just be fined on the spot. If I'm accused of murder, I'll go to court. And so I do think the issue with auto-exclusion for what is objectively a far milder offence than, for example, disgusting racism, that was why. But nonetheless, I mean, I'm personally fine with getting rid of it. The only issue I'd say is, what we had before was basic. What we have is in practice, don't ask, don't tell. Labour members in lots of Britain vote for the Liberal Democrats without talking about it. I think what I would say in 2019 is the Lib Dems had a scorched earth approach to the Labour Party. And a lot of the People's Vote, the good faith People's Vote campaigners made the point that the only path towards Remain was through a Corbyn-led Labour government. So if you spent all your time vilifying the Labour Party, you can't have what you can have. If you either have them both, or you don't have any at all. And we'll see if that will change and they're up for more constructive workings. I would note the Lib Dems in 2010 said, we'd love to work with Labour, but not Gordon Brown. Then after that, they said, we'd love to work with Labour, but not Ed Miliband. And didn't just start with Corbyn. They've always made it clear that no Labour leader is ever acceptable to them. So, all I would say is it makes sense for a Labour Party to have a rule, which is the one basic rule is you support the party which you're a member of. I know that's difficult in a country where we have a out-of-date electoral system and people are forced to make these different choices. But I think, I just think we should stick to a rule of, just don't go on national television and boast about it. But I think people can, I'm happy to get rid of that rule. We need to be more punitive about people who are racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, transphobic. I'd like to see harsher penalties for all of those things, by the way. But I wouldn't, though, be advocating, for example, parliamentary pacts like some are making. I think Labour should aim and strive for majority, and only if it fails to win a majority should it then, in that situation, consider its options.
Excellent. Me to turn to you on that. You, of course, are in a Labour Liberal Democrat marginal.
Not anymore. I was. They're third now. But I won't gloat about that. So, I mean, just on the rule, if we'd applied it strenuously in the European elections last year, we wouldn't have had many members left, would we? So, I know hundreds of members of my constituency who voted Green or even a few Lib Dem the European elections. We didn't report any of them. But I think the rule should be about campaigning for another party. If you are a member of the Labour Party, you need to either sit at home and stay quiet and do your thing in the privacy of your own home, or campaign for the Labour Party. I think if you go out and campaign for another party, then that is incompatible with membership. So I think the rule does need. I think it's out of date rule and needs changing. On the broader point, I think I'm probably a little bit in a different place to Owen. I think that because the mountain is so high to climb at the next general election, and because we don't have electoral reform, one, we should commit to electoral reform in our manifesto. And I think that we're moving in that direction. More and more MPs, although we have less MPs, more and more MPs are supporting electoral reform and proportional representation. There's debate about what form. Let's not go there. But there is the general principle is becoming the norm. But I think in the next general election, we should seriously consider and have a debate within the party and with the other parties about not a progressive alliance. I don't consider the Liberal Democrats a progressive party, but an anti-conservative alliance. By the next general election, the Tories will have been in for 14 years. Now, nobody in the opposition parties, apart from the DUP, wants to see that move to 18, 20 years, right? So there needs to be serious consideration of that and a debate. We need to have an internal debate and we need to have a discussion with the others. Because you can see, like, why are we wasting resources in Brighton Pavilion? Like, what's the point? What's the point? And why are the Greens putting 200 candidates up against us, where in some of those seats they're just stopping? You know, it happened to me in 2015. If the Greens hadn't put a candidate up against me in 2015, I'd been an MP in 2015, right? So it is more common than you think, us having to contest the Greens. The Liberals is another matter, and I think, you know, that's more complicated. Us contesting the Greens means we don't win seats, and it just helps the Tories. In terms of universal basic income, in this period, in the crisis, and then during the recovery stage, because we're not going to suddenly go back to work and everything's going to be fine again. This is going to be a long haul back, you know. I think that we should consider universal basic, or not, because I led a parliamentary letter saying that we should have universal basic income on the model the Spanish are doing. Obviously, it would be slightly different in terms of payment methods and all that, but, you know, basically they started working on it 3 weeks. We could have had a UBI by now. In the longer term, I think Sonia's made some really good arguments. So I think that actually it's not about. I don't think we should worry about full employment anymore, but we should worry about what the nation needs and who we need to do it and what skills we need to imbue with them, and then, you know, work and contributing to the nation, to our national happiness and stability and growth and, you know, environment are all things people should be contributing to. And so that's where we should look at it. But I also very strongly think that we need universality in our system. So, for instance, you know, everybody in this country agrees we should have universal health service. You know, it is socialism. The NHS is the living embodiment of socialism in this country, and possibly the best living embodiment of socialism anywhere in the world that's lasted as long as it has. So why can't we extend that to, for instance, childcare? So why shouldn't we have a universal-based service in health? Why can't we have it in childcare? Why can't we have it in social care? You know, why can't we have it at university? Which is obviously our policy. So we should be thinking about universal basic services and then how they're delivered and who delivers them. So, you know, they shouldn't be delivered by Richard Branson. It's a very basic thing, you know, that I think. But they could be delivered by the state, or they could be delivered through a mutual model or whatever. But I think that we should expand universal basic services. And then in the context of that, we should think about the social safety net broadly. Now, if we're having that debate, I think universal basic income has to be part of that. And I'm open to it. So you know, let's have the debate, right? Let's not shy away from it. And it's good that we're having that debate today. On the question of, in 2019, was there too much policy? I'm going to be controversial because there was not too much policy. The problem was, so for instance, the one that everybody talks about is broadband, right? So I love that policy. I think that's a great policy. National broadband service in the public sector, allowing children who can't afford, you know, parents who can't afford to give their children free internet. Brilliant, right? The problem with that policy was we didn't spend 2 years fighting for it in the public domain, right? That policy should be announced straight after 2017 election, saying, we didn't include it in this manifesto, but this is something we're thinking about the next manifesto. And you could have got some outriders, maybe even the Fabians Society, to write a pamphlet about it, to go on media about it. That's how you do it. And then you start your spokespeople saying, well, let's think about this. I mean, basically, it's sort of what we're doing with UBI, isn't it? There's sort of like we're dancing around the edges of it. There are some proponents of it in and around the party, you know. So, and I'm proposing universe-based services. We're having that debate, right? So we need to get that into the public domain. We need that on Newsnight, on Question Time, on BBC News, you know, in newspapers, all those other places, in social media where we have it. We never did that. We never did that with the broadband service. And if we had done that, maybe we wouldn't have all on the doorstep been told, you're like crazy people. Why are you giving everybody free broadband? Why are you nationalising Openreach? This is a mad idea. And then you try, like everybody I spoke to for 10 minutes explaining it, all at the end said, yeah, actually, that's quite a good idea. But but we couldn't speak to everybody in the country individually on the doorstep for 10 minutes about broadband, could we? So that's why we need to have, we can be as policy rich 2019, we just need to fight for it for 2 years.
Brilliant, Alex. We've only got time for one more round of questions, so I'm sorry to those I can't bring in. I'm going to ask the top voted question is from Edison Hune. Edison, can you speak now?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. So my question is, how can the Labour Party ensure that, as well as handling the current crisis, we can simultaneously do the deep thinking needed to prepare ready-to-go narratives that are resonant with the general public? And more importantly, how can this vision setting that you all speak about be an inclusive process, especially inclusive of those former Labour voters who we have lost?
Great. And I've also got a question from Sam Nutt, who's not on the call anymore, but it's such a good question, I'm going to read it out. So Labour has 5 years now out of power. How can we affect change? It's just disappeared. How can we affect, it's been upvoted, that's why I can't see it anymore. Someone else has said they like it. It's gone. So basically, he says, how can we affect change while we're not in power and change the country during this crisis? So that is Sam's question. And then I'm going to ask a couple of quite niche questions because they've been really given high votes. One is from George Peretz. George, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, wow.
Go ahead, George.
To ask about the government's plans to attack judicial review and the Human Rights Act, and how can Labour best respond to that threat without falling vulnerable to the lefty human rights QC attacks democracy charge?
So attacks to human rights, judicial review, a whole load of very unspecified sort of constitutional reforms potentially coming. It is a risk, particularly led by Keir Starmer as a prominent lawyer, that we look like a bunch of lefty liberals if we stand up against that. And then final question, also highly rated, is from the former MP Hugh Bailey. Hugh, let me just bring you in if I can do that.
Unmute now. Does that let me come in?
Hugh, come in.
Yeah. If we as Fabians can have 100, 150 people involved in a discussion using the web, how quickly can we get Parliament to reintroduce daily scrutiny of ministers through question time?
So is it time for an online Parliament? Alex, why don't you start off?
Yeah, we're well on with that, Hugh. So thanks for the question. So Chion Wara, who's our Shadow Digital Minister, did a letter which I signed. Lots of MPs, over 200 MPs, signed it. Parliament, it's a really technical sort of answer to this. Parliament now has got its a license for Zoom, and they are trying to make it more secure so it can be utilised. The Speaker is keen that if we can't come back to 21st of April, which I can't see how we can, that we start having parliamentary sessions utilising technology like this. So I think it's going to happen. I'll be honest, our biggest problem isn't so much having debates or committees, and committees have started on utilising Zoom or other technologies. It is voting. There's a few of us who've got a very strong view that we have a system now where you can sign EDMs and other things, and we have these things which you'll know about, called deferred division, where rather than voting by queuing up and then they're taking your name, you do it on a bit of paper. So you can digitise that process. There is some resistance from within, both culturally and technologically. But I think the technological is coming for the cultural to allow us to vote remotely, because it's like a Pandora's box then, because that means that why should MPs come to the chamber to vote and stand in the division lobby and all of that, which we all hate. Well, maybe not all, but I hate it. It's bloody anachronistic. Anyway, so we are moving on. So I hope that will help you with that. I'll try and answer some more of these, Andrew. So George, I mean, you really should tell us. You're one of the leading human rights barristers in the country. But I think that just maybe, spitballing this, that there are human rights cases that everybody can understand are important and that they can identify with. And I think that maybe we need to campaign on that. So it isn't, some sort of liberal lefty, case, but it is something that they will understand about their own family, or their own lives. And we can utilise cases like that to make the case for judicial human rights. And just lastly, maybe on the one where how can we affect change while we're not in power? Now, I'll be honest. I'm almost boring myself the way I'm going to answer this, because this is the way that politicians, Labour MPs, always answer this, by saying, actually, we are in power. We're in power in Wales, we're in power in London, we're in power in Manchester, we're in power in no, actually not in power in Liverpool, and actually we're not very good at highlighting some of the things that we've done. So, for instance, in Wales, the Future Generations Act in Wales is absolutely brilliant bit of legislation, and we are now got private members who are coming through the Lords, try and do that through the UK Parliament. So there are some really good things. Andy Burnham has reduced homelessness significantly. He's not completely tackled it, but he has significantly reduced homelessness. So we need to codify these successes, and then, they're not going to cover everything, but they're at least going to be able to say, look, this is how Labour has improved lives while we've been out of power for 10 to 14 years. And then we can then build them into the national policy platform. And our local councils up and down the country, again, I could talk about 20 different things Leeds have done, great, particularly on climate, and on children's services. And you can say, well, actually, how much more could they do, and how much more could be done if Labour were in power? So I think that's a really boring answer for that. That is the answer. That's your sort of standard answer.
Great. Thanks, Alex, and all your contributions tonight. Sonia, your last remarks.
Yeah, so I'll just say something very briefly on a couple of questions. I know we're running out of time. So first, on the sort of ready to go narratives thing, sort of coming out of this pandemic, I actually think that there's so much uncertainty at the moment about where we're even going to be as a country, like in 3 or 4 months' time, that I kind of think, I know this sounds like a cop-out, but I think it's kind of too early actually to sort of say what the ready-to-go narratives for Labour should be in like 6 months' time. So maybe that does sound like a bit of a cop-out, but I think it is important, because I think one thing it's quite easy to forget actually is that Labour does really need to be thinking about how it wins in 5 years' time, but there's going to be a lot of uncertainty in this parliament, and perhaps more than in previous parliaments of the past. So I would counsel against anyone sort of saying that they think they've got all the answers now. And then I suppose on the human rights question, I see actually we've got a question about Saudi Arabia and Corbyn promising to end arms sales to Saudi Arabia. and how to sort of make the existing leadership, the new leadership, kind of good on that promise. And actually, you know, I've been hugely critical of Jeremy Corbyn in recent years, but I do think Saudi Arabia was one of the things that he got really right. So I think that is something that is important to hold the new leadership to account on.
Great. And Owen, last thoughts from you.
On civil liberties, I never understood why the argument isn't. There's such an obvious, passionate argument, which I think can resonate and cut through, because all too often it comes across as quite legalistic, wet, sandal-wearing, etc., which is a kind of, these are the rights and freedoms our ancestors fought for at huge cost and huge sacrifice. It's almost the kind of, you know, some would call it patriotic, I suppose, that, you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants, that those before us, our mothers, our fathers, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our ancestors before them, fought for these rights, fought for these freedoms, and it's not for us to let those with power and authority to seize away, to snatch away rights and freedoms that our ancestors fought for at such cost and at such sacrifice. And I think it should be done in that emotional way. And I think all too often it isn't. It does come across as wet and wishy-washy and legalistic. But that passionate, emotive argument is something which I very rarely hear with civil liberties. Again, I'm glad Sonia mentioned about Saudi Arabia. I've been to a refugee camp in Djibouti, a Yemeni refugee camp. And I do think, and I hope this is something which is upheld by Lisa Nandy, the new Shadow Foreign Secretary, you know, I think actually, bizarrely enough, I think it was missing from Labour in terms of being a bit more powerful and articulate about this. What about, you know, Saudi Arabia, which is obviously carpet bombing Yemen, the worst humanitarian crisis on earth, exporting international terrorism, beheading people who are dissidents, who are gay, chopping up their opponents in foreign embassies. What about Turkey as well? Turkey, which is at war with the Kurdish people, at war with democracy. The first thing Theresa May did, or one of the first foreign trips she did before she went and met Donald Trump, was to go off to Turkey and sell some fighter jets. You know, this is a country which is at war with those rights and freedoms. And, you know, there was a British woman, a socialist feminist, who was murdered by the Turkish army. She was in Syrian Kurdistan when the Turkish army invaded. And, you know, I mean, there's so many other examples. Hungary at the moment, Hungary, which is now a dictatorship in the European Union. Astonishing stuff. So I do think that a foreign policy which is genuinely ethical and stands up to human rights abuses by our allies, by our friends, by people we are arming and supporting and helping to prop up diplomatically, I think is very important. And just finally, on the, I mean, I completely agree with Sonia. We don't know what society looks like in 2 weeks, let alone 2 months, let alone 2 years. It's completely beyond us. I do think what will happen after this crisis is there will be a monumental deficit. And there will be this question again, is who is going to pay for the aftermath? And what the Tories managed to do in 2010 onwards is to revise history to claim that the spending which they backed pound for pound by Labour was responsible for the crash. And then what they simultaneously did is push a narrative that that spending was going to the undeserving poor, scroungers and freeloaders and so on, to build consent for it. And obviously austerity actually affected millions of people in the end, including the welfare state, low-paid workers. The Tories have been forced to abandon, at least in rhetoric, austerity in the last election. A lot of their new supporters will not wear it, and polling shows that people are absolutely exhausted with it. So when Keir Starmer said on Saturday that there can be no return to austerity and we've got to reimagine the economy in the aftermath of this, I think that's self-evident. Labour must not make the mistake that I'm afraid Ed Miliband, who I love very much, more specifically Ed Balls, who is a catastrophic shadow chancellor of the Exchequer and I think owes a lot to Labour's 2015 defeat, is to go down austerity light and not offer an inspiring vision of what the economy can look like. And just finally, on what Labour does outside of power, I of course completely agree with good comrade Alex. But equally, I do think community organising was something that does need to be built on. I think Labour and the Labour movement need to be present and active in local communities. We've seen the COVID-19 aid group movement set up across the country, people helping in the local neighbourhoods, being present. That shouldn't be done in a transactional way, which is kind of, I'm here because I want your vote and support. Labour activists should do that on the basis of I expect nothing in return. But if Labour's present in communities, it will help build trust. It will also help inform Labour activists of many of the issues and injustices that happen in society, and hopefully build pressure for that experience to come through the Labour Party. And who knows, to bring in people at the sharp end into the Labour movement and into positions of power and influence. So I think community organising should be built on. I think it's in its infancy within the Labour movement, the Labour Party, but I think it's an idea that needs to be built on. Alex has spoken about it, I know, very convincingly after the election defeat, and I think that's something which all wings of the Labour Party can unite around.
Can I just jump in with one really brief point, which is that I completely agree with Owen on the sort of civil liberties and rights front, making the argument in emotional terms. And I think if you look at where the big successes on this stuff have been, whether it's the campaign for equal marriage, particularly in the US, or the campaign for abortion reform in Ireland, those campaigns were made in such human terms. They weren't in the sort of language of human rights and equal rights, because that doesn't actually resonate particularly well with people who are naturally conservatively inclined. It was done in sort of the language of love. Like, you know, everyone's got the right to a family life and deserves love. And, you know, in Ireland, it was all about, it could be your sister, your daughter, your mum, who might have been travelling over by themselves to Liverpool to get an abortion. And I think that's really important, and it ties back to that point I was making about communication. And I think one thing the left can sometimes be a bit bad at is being like, we're morally right and therefore everyone should agree with us, and we don't have to do the hard work to convince people who maybe naturally don't see the world in quite the same way that we do. And for me, that's got to be so key to Labour winning a general election in this country. You start where people are coming from, not where you think they should be, and if they're not there, they're kind of morally reprehensible.
That's a great place to end it. Thank you, Sonia, and to Owen and Alex as well. If you want more of this, the Fabian Review is out next week, and it's got loads of post-leadership election and coronavirus content, including things from 3 new members of the shadow cabinet. And in my editorial, I argue that the one thing Labour needs to focus on now is job creation, because I fear this is going to be an early 80s style mass unemployment recession. We've also got lots of other online meetings coming up over the next few weeks, so do look out for those. And as I said at the start, if you're not a member of the Fabian Society, we'd love you to join up. Just click on our website. Thanks to you all for participating. Sorry I couldn't get to more of your questions, and we'll see you again at a meeting soon. Have a good evening.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, everyone. It's been an honour. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.